Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil on today's show. The last day of May, if we can believe that. Time is flying by. We are less than 100 days from college football season kicking off for the 2024 football season. First for the Ducks in the Big Ten. Recently, to kind of start the discussion around the 2024 season, Erik dropped a ranking of the top 10 players on the roster for the 2024 season going into summer. I think we should probably update this maybe. I don't know if it's like right before the season starts because we don't really get to see a ton of preseason camp, but maybe we get enough. Maybe we hear enough that we could do it again, but we definitely should do it like through September, through October, and then the end of the season as well.
Yeah, I'd like to do one. By the way, a change of backdrop. I'm in Minnesota. I'm in my aunt and uncle's basement, so sorry for the less duck represented.
Midwestern basement. I love it.
It's a Midwestern basement. Yeah, I could turn the camera here. We could show you. Sorry, aunt and uncle, a little messy. Doing our best. No, and I would like to do it actually in August, maybe once we get through camp, just because there's a couple names that I don't have on this top 10 list. I did also, and we'll run through this too. I did like an honorable mention 11 through 20, a couple of guys on there who haven't even enrolled. And you can probably guess if you're a diehard fan who those type of players would be. I just don't know what they are because I haven't seen them at all at Oregon. So I felt like I didn't know if they were top 10 players, but they're right in that kind of next group. So yeah, there's, I think, some value in kind of continuing to update this as we go.
How did you, real quick before we dive into the list, how did we come up with, what was the criteria that you processed through?
Well, it's a largely subjective exercise. I'm looking at kind of, trying to project guys I think are going to have the biggest impact. I did take into account, some level of combination of these guys are going to be the best players on this team, but also guys that I think are maybe the top draft prospects. So it's kind of a combination of both. I'm sure there are people that are going to have very differing opinions. That's fine. Like that's kind of exactly what this is. I'm not totally sold on this list being anything more than just my opinion during a day in May. And it was a fun kind of backdrop to start the conversation earlier this week that I think we had a pretty good back and forth with some of the fans on the site. So, and I think part of what I was trying to do was give a sense of how many of the new players are involved here. Like if you look through this, I think of my top 10, like 7 of them are guys that have transferred in the last couple classes. And I think like 4 of them are guys that are basically brand new this year. Right. So I wanted to kind of give a sense of like, hey, based upon what's happened in kind of the portal world that we're now in, these rosters change a lot and the caliber of players on these rosters change a lot. And even for a team like Oregon, you look up and you could say my number 1, my number 3, my number 6, and my number 10 players are all brand new this year that have come from other schools.
Absolutely. All right. Let's go 10 through 8 first off. So you've got at number 10, Jamari Caldwell, the transfer from Houston. Number 9 is a surprise to me, linebacker Jeffrey Bassa. And then number 8 is offensive lineman Johnny Cornelius, who will have the unique perspective of going from protecting the front side of a quarterback to the blind side of a quarterback in 2 years. Let's talk about these 3 guys. Caldwell, I think, is in a good spot, but what place these 3 guys here in these spots for you?
So you said was that a surprise because you thought he should be higher?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, honestly, I think there's a chance he could be a lot higher. I'm a really big fan of him, and obviously, I think the growth. I don't know if we've talked about it enough from 2022 to 23. I just posted about this on the site, but he had the biggest growth in PFF's tackle grade of any player in the Pac-12 last year. He went from being a 47 tackle grade in 22 to being like an 84 in 23. It's a humongous improvement. I thought he got a lot better. I think there's room for him, if we do continue to update this, to go much higher on this list. Again, I think there's a couple of guys I like a little better. Sure. And Cornelius, I'll acknowledge, I retroactively almost want to move him higher and move the other offensive tackle lower. This is more of a projection thing of like, of growth here. And I think maybe I forgot to consider how much Johnny himself could grow. Physically, Matt, I think he looked like he put on some weight this spring. Yes. And so maybe H too low for Johnny. I feel pretty good about where I've got Jeff and Jamari for now. But we'll see. I mean, again, this is like a lot of this stuff could change, and a lot of it's going to be fun to see how it tracks. And like you said, maybe this is something I continue to update through fall, but also through the season.
I think for me, I looked at Bossa, and I view him as probably a top 5 player. But the problem is with this exercise is there's probably 10, maybe 12 guys that you could legitimately say, hey, this is a top 5 player on this team. And I think that's probably a big reason why this team is viewed in the light that they are this offseason as a potential Final Four type team, a team that could get to the national championship game, because it's hard to find 10 guys when there's probably 15 legitimately top 10 players, and there's probably 10 to 12 legitimate top 5 players on this team. The Cornelius one, I think, Eric, his stock went way up last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could see a similar jump. Like, I don't know if he's maximized his potential yet. In terms of draft perspective, looking at the next level. I wouldn't be surprised if this time next year we're talking about replacing a second round draft pick offensive tackle.
Well, and I'll say I kind of expect that's the case, and yet I still have him at 8.
Yeah.
And it's in part because I like some of the guys above him even more, but also, like I said, he's probably, just looking at the list now about a week after it was published, I think if there's a guy to move up, it would be him.
Yeah. All right. Next 3, we've got Jordan James at 7, Evan Stewart at 6, Tez Johnson at 5. I absolutely love your inclusion of Jordan James in the top 7.
Yes,
I think I was beating this drum last year that he was going to be better than Bucky. Not that Bucky was a bad player, but I just think I love Jordan James's potential as the primary back now.
Yeah, and I kind of grouped all the skill guys together here because I think there's a lot to love and a lot to be excited about. But I think they're kind of like, I feel like Tez and Evan are going to have very comparable seasons potentially. Now, some of this is going to depend upon what happens with my top guy, who you might, I'm not going to give it away, but you might have a sense of who that would be, how he kind of gels and kind of fits into the system. But I think I came out of the spring game going, man, like Evan Stewart is superstar potential guy. And what Tez did last year, and I just ran through on the website as well, if you're curious, I ran through all the 1,000-yard receiving seasons in school history. Not a lot of them, only 13. And I think Tez might have had like the 2nd or 3rd or 4th best individual receiving season in school history last year. Kind of got overshadowed a little because of Troy. But statistically, I mean, he's got the school record in receptions with 86. I think he's 3rd in receiving yards and 4th in touchdowns last year. This guy was a total stud. And the fact that he's 5th on this list, I think just speaks to the guys above him, I think are higher NFL draft prospects. And that sort of played a little bit of a role into it. But this guy is so dynamic and so fun. And it's such a cool story. I think that, you know, just the whole background with he and Bo and but before that, even just the fact this guy grew up wanting to play here. And now he's getting an opportunity to do that and potentially rewriting some of the school's like receiving records. And I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of surpasses Troy on a couple of these too, like depending on how the season plays out and how pass heavy the offense proves to be.
All right, we're gonna go now. Let's list off your top the guys that didn't make the cut. Let's go honorable mention here real quick. We'll dive into the last 4 here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and this was the one I thought Terrence Ferguson had him at 11. It was really hard not to have him in a top 10. And maybe that looks stupid and seems completely wrong. Maybe he should have been in there over like a Caldwell, but I've seen Jamar Caldwell as a 1st-round projected draft pick. Some places he was a player that is ranked as one of the top transfers in the country. Ferguson, though, like he's about to. Speaking of Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson having record-breaking seasons, like Ferguson, if he has the year we think he could go down as like statistically the best receiving tight end the school's had. So that's what kind of a player we've got there who didn't even crack the top 10. I've got Derek Harmon, Michigan State transfer at 12. Again, sight unseen. I think he probably could and maybe deserves to be higher on this list. Just haven't seen him. I've got Tyshim Johnson and Kobe Savage at 13 and 14, the two players we expect to start at safety. We've got Marcus Harper, the left guard, at 15. Mateo Uiagalelei, the sophomore edge rusher, who I think is going to be taking a big jump here in his second year. I've got him at 16. Justin Jacobs at 17 kind of feels too low, but
yeah,
but
you run
there's
through the numbers.
There's a lot of guys. I didn't really know what to do with 18 Jaleel Florence. I think he's a really good player. I think it's also possible he doesn't even start. He's kind of hard to predict right now given the injury. And then a couple of transfers here to round it out. Matthew Bedford, I have at 19, who I think will start at right guard, and Brandon Johnson, who I expect will be the star nickel player there this fall. Another player we haven't seen yet because he hasn't enrolled. So a lot of really good players there, and a lot of good players I didn't even run through that you could certainly toss in there if you really wanted to. So it's a tough exercise, man. There's a lot of really good players on this team.
Ferguson's the one that's really hard.
Yeah, I agreed.
Because he's so good and has been, I think, a really consistent player. And then the next one for me that was really hard to not have on the list, and because I think he's kind of really flown under the radar a little bit in his seasons with the Ducks. Tyshim Johnson. I think he was really good last year. Really, really, really good. And to get him to come back next year, especially with all the newness that's going to be in the secondary. But like what you said with this exercise, it's who do you take out? I don't know and that's the hard part.
Yeah. And you're kind of, again, you're trying to parse through team value, upside for the draft. Like Tyshim led the team in snaps last year from a defensive player. I've been a big fan of his since he came over from Ole Miss. That was one of my favorite transfer portal kind of highlight films that I watched last year. So I thought he was going to be a really good player. Like you said, Matt, I thought he was really great for the Ducks last year. It'll be interesting. I should also note he's kind of changing positions. He was playing in the box primarily as a star last year. I think he's going to be playing more safety. We'll be curious to see how he kind of fits, but he and Kobe Savage I have kind of grouped together because I think they're both talented players who've kind of proven they can play at a high level. But there's just maybe a gap from a physical stature and athleticism perspective to get up to this top group. But it's super hard. We're kind of splitting hairs here.
Yes, 100%. All right, let's go back to now 4, and that's offensive lineman, left tackle Josh Connerly, who has the other unique perspective of going from protecting the blind side of Bo Nix now to protecting the front side of Dylan Gabriel. Another offensive lineman that I'm assuming, like myself, you think his projections after this year could go sky high.
Yeah, this is probably the most. This one and number 2 on my list are the guys I'm kind of going off pedigree and taking a step here. And I think Cornelius was better than Josh last year. I think most people would probably agree. I just kind of go back and think this is a guy who has all the physical tools in the world. He was just a sophomore. Last year was his first year starting and really playing a major role at this level. I thought he had some great moments. I think he had some pretty underwhelming moments. The Washington games, he had a really hard time with like a Braylon Trice and a couple of the guys they had coming off the edge. But the ceiling is really high here. Athletically, he can do some things that offensive tackles just shouldn't be able to do. And I think the NFL draft ceiling between he and Cornelius both is could be a first round, could be a second rounder. I just tend to think Connerly might take a little bit more of a step considering he hasn't played that long. But maybe I should have had Cornelius and Connerly just lined up right next to each other because I feel like they're kind of on even footing. Maybe having 4 spots apart feels wrong, and maybe having Josh as your second best offensive player on this list feels a little bit wrong. But this is a lot of projection, and that's kind of the fun doing this in the offseason coming out of a spring where a lot of people were saying a lot of really kind of positive and kind of flattering things about him.
I think he's in the right spot. I think he's the better player.
Okay.
I think he's the better draft prospect, but I think both of these guys are bona fide NFL offensive linemen. And you're really, like you said earlier, splitting hairs here of differentiating between the two. I also I can't remember the exact quote, but I like how I think this is the second offseason now where Josh has gone on the record in front of cameras saying, I need to become better or improve on my being an asshole, or I can't remember the exact quote, but basically he's saying I need to be more of an asshole of an offensive lineman, and playing mean, playing nasty. And I think that's hilarious. All right. Number 3, the highest rated, not the highest rated newcomer on the defensive side of the football. Jabbar Muhammad, who comes via a transfer from the Washington Huskies.
Yeah, this was hard. So he and the guy I have above to me, and I guess I'd include Bossa in this, are like the 3 defensive alphas, and they all play at different levels of the defense. I just loved what we saw from Jabbar at Washington last year. Again, kind of limited what we've seen with him at Oregon. The spring game, there were some people who were I don't know why people thought he didn't play well or something like that. I don't think he was thrown at very much, in part because he's great in coverage. He broke up at least one pass to Gary Bryant on a key 3rd down play, I think in the first half. This is a guy who I think is your cornerback 1, and this could be another year where you have a corner drafted pretty high who's just a 1-year guy at Oregon. You think back to what Christian Gonzalez did, obviously, as a 1st-round pick, and then this last year with Kyrie going to the Vikings in the 4th round. I think Jabbar will make it 3 straight years. You have a kind of a one-and-done transfer player get drafted in the first 3 or 4 rounds, and probably closer to Gonzalez than Kyrie. So I'm really high on him. I think he's going to be a stud, and I think going into a season knowing kind of who your alpha corner is a really good thing. I don't know if that really felt like it was the case when Gonzo got here. Like, I think maybe people internally felt that. Externally, I know we weren't feeling that way. And certainly last year, it was kind of like, okay, Kyrie comes from Alabama, but he wasn't like a dude there. He wasn't like a star player. He started a couple games, but not a lot, and then was kind of out of the rotation by the time he left. And obviously, he became your best corner. I think you feel pretty good that you have a bona fide star here with Jabbar, and somebody who could maybe even take his game up a level.
All right. Let's move now to number 2, highest rated defensive player on the board, and that's defensive lineman and senior Jordan Burch. Big things ahead for this man.
And this is the one I think people are going to be most critical of. And certainly that was his placement kind of brought some interesting back and forth on the board. This is somewhat projection. I think last year, kind of similar to like what we saw with Brandon Dorlus, the production didn't meet how he played all the time. You know, he, I think, had a really nice stretch to start conference play, statistically at least, in terms of tackles for loss and sacks and being kind of involved. And it kind of faded down the back half, although he had a really great game against Oregon State, facing off against Talisa Fuanga, who ended up being a first-round draft pick. This guy has all the tools to be, a first-round pick himself this year. I think he's extremely, fluid athletically for a person his size. He moves in space better than you'd expect for a guy. Again, he's like 6'6", 295. And really, I think for Oregon to reach its ceiling going into the Big Ten, they're going to need somebody to be a dude off the edge. And so I'm projecting Jordan steps into that and is motivated to become that player. I don't think this is a Kayvon Thibodeau caliber player, and they're different physically and size-wise, but you hope maybe he can be somebody who makes similar contributions as just kind of your star edge player. And frankly, they need someone like him to do that. So again, kind of he and Connerly were the two where I felt like I was maybe projecting more than anything else. A couple of guys who were former 5-star recruits, people, really high pedigree athletes, but kind of need to put it together. I think Burch does. And I don't know if it sits great with me that he's my top rated defensive player, but I think for Oregon defensively to be as good as they want to be, that would be the hope.
I think it's interesting that I think last year you could argue the program had some bona fide superstars on the offense side of the ball, but it was clear like the defense had the better position group, I think, or the unit. From a NFL or top 10 list of guys, it's inverse this year. It's flipped. I think the offensive side of the football has a clear cut advantage between the two sides of this game, to the point where, like, to be honest, Erik, like I don't know if I would have had a defensive player in the top 5.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like I would have had probably Connerly and Jordan, and then one of Tez and Evan Stewart, maybe both, in the top 5, and then now number 1,
yeah.
your number 1 guy, Dylan Gabriel. This is the one where I'm curious. I don't know if I would have put him number 1. He's certainly productive, but I don't know. He's not he's not being viewed as like Bo Nix was, as like a potential first-round draft pick this early into the season.
No, and 2 things, but he's also like 4th in the Heisman Trophy.
Yes.
Vegas odds right now. So I've kind of, this was interesting. I actually had him 4th when I started this exercise. I had him below the 3 guys that were just behind him. And as I was going through it, I was kind of going, does that make sense to do that? If he's like in the Heisman consideration, he was the Big 12's first team quarterback last year. The Big 10 doesn't have a lot of good. I mean, this guy, I think, is probably the clear favorite to be like the Big 10's first team quarterback. And so not putting a guy who's seen that way at the most important position felt kind of wonky. I get your point though. And if we're doing the NFL exercise, like you could do multiple lists. You could do one of like, and that I kind of tried to combine them, which is maybe 100% incorrect. But if I was doing it off NFL draft, we would move some players around and Dylan wouldn't be up here. I don't know what his NFL draft ceiling is, just because I'm taller than he is by several inches. You know what I mean? Like he's not somebody who's known to have like just a bazooka for an arm either. So like, I don't know what his draft ceiling is. Is he a 4th or a 5th round pick? Does he kind of go in that like Spencer Rattler kind of range this year? I don't know. But I think he's going to be the team's leader. And I felt like, let's put him atop the list. And maybe this is one that feels really crazy later in the year, but it's also like, if he ends up being a Heisman Trophy winner, like he kind of has to be up in the top.
And that's a good point, because that never had registered in my mind when I saw this list. But if you're a Heisman caliber guy, you've got to be on this list, and you've got to be really high on this list. And so to your point, like, I think there's an argument to be made that he should be the number 1, but I think there's enough talent on this team that if he doesn't play up to the Heisman caliber season that we're expecting out of him this coming year, he's going to get surpassed, because there's enough talented dudes on this list that can make it.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody, honestly, like 2 through 8 on this list, 2 through 9, I'll throw any of those guys could surpass him at some point this year. And shoot, like guys like Karen, I mean, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Like, I think he's going to be great. I just saw Tom Fornelli from the Cover 3. He compared him to He's said he's basically left-handed Bo Nix. And then I don't know. This was wild to me. Matt, did you know that Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel have the exact same number of career total touchdowns and interceptions? They're both identical.
I did not know that.
I had not.
That is absolutely wild, considering how many games they've both played.
Right, and that's what blew my mind. Fornelli had it in his article, and now we're kind of on a tangent. It was just a cool stat I saw yesterday, but it was like 150 touchdowns and 26, is including rushing touchdowns, and like 26 picks or something. So if we think he's a Bo Nix caliber-ish player, I think he's a step below that, and he certainly doesn't have the NFL ceiling. Then he should definitely be in discussion to be up here. But I agree. Like when I started doing this, I didn't want to put him at 1, and then kind of the more I went through it, I went, does it? But I also felt, do I feel great about putting Jordan Birch as my best player on the team? That was another part of it, because I just went, is that feel kind of ridiculous to do based off of a season last year where he was really good at times, but also kind of had some inconsistencies. So
I don't know if I would have, I know I wouldn't have him number 1, but I would probably have Jeffrey Bossa in the top 5. He would probably be because I equate Bossa's IQ, production, everything that we talk about with Bo Nix, everything we've talked about with Dylan Gabriel, but for Bossa on the flip side for the defense. Like, he's not maybe the highest draft prospect, but what he means to the team from a communication, identification, and adjusting process, like, he's really good. And then last year he was phenomenal.
Great year
in all areas. But look, like, that's what he talked about this past spring is a reason why he came back is because he wanted to get better at the offenses that they're going to face in the Big Ten. He's a very good pass coverage linebacker. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's elite against the run, but he's not bad either.
He's gotten better.
He's gotten better, and this is going to be that big test for him where we'll learn or not, like, whether he should be in the top 5 or not with the teams he's going to face on the offensive side of the football.
Matt, can I ask you really quick, who would you Who would you put at number 1 if you were doing this? I'm curious.
Probably.
It's tough.
Probably now I think about it, it would probably either be Tez or Dylan Gabriel.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe Connerly. But like you, I don't feel confident putting Birch at number 1. Yeah. I think Muhammad could potentially get there, but I would have him outside the top 5 right now.
It's tough. It's really fun. I mean, that's what the cool part is. I'm sure if we put this up on YouTube, there's going to be a lot of back and forths and a lot of people saying I'm crazy, which is fine. But go through the exercise and try to run through a top 10. I think it's like you'll find it's really hard to kind of parse through. There's like you said earlier, there's probably 15, 16 guys, 17. I mean, I can go down Justin Jacobs. Like you could tell me he's a top 10 player and I wouldn't bat an eye. I'd say you're probably projecting more than basing off what we've seen at Oregon, but it's not easy. And so that's kind of the difficulty of this exercise. But I think what also makes it kind of fun, because I think if we were to have even all the guys who cover the team in the media from a day to day, if we were all to go through this exercise, I bet we'd all have very different lists.
Yep. 100%. All right, let's take a quick break. Real quick. I forgot to ask this question. I'd like us to go through this exercise real quick of who didn't make the top 10 that we feel most confident to get themselves into the top 10 at the end of the year. Is it as simple as Terrence Ferguson and we just eliminate him from the conversation, or is there someone else that you think that could make it?
I'll do 2 answers. I'll say I really think Derek Harmon's a top 10 player. I just felt weird putting a guy who, and again, I know you listeners will say, well, we haven't really seen Jamari Caldwell, Dylan Gabriel, right, Evan Stewart, Jabbar Muhammad play at Oregon, but it felt, I mean, at least I kind of had them. At least I kind of got a sense of where they were from the spring game, and it felt good enough about how they played to keep them where they are. I think he has a chance to be there. And then my kind of like real sleeper-ish, and it feels crazy to call him a sleeper because he's such a big recruit. I really think Mateo is going to have an awesome year. Like I just have a sense that, you know, this is a guy who has all the physical tools. He had some kind of rough moments last year, but this is a true freshman playing a lot of snaps, and I think he's going to grow, and just based on his athletic pedigree, will be somebody who I think could certainly be up in this list. I don't know if he's a guarantee, but I think his ceiling is higher than some of the guys I had in the top 10.
That's the name I was going to bring up beyond Ferguson, is Mateo. Now, I guess dark horse, maybe a name that's more so going to be on this top 10 list next year for this exercise at this point of the year, Tatum Tuioti.
I love both those guys. Love them both. Yep.
I think Tuioti could, what we saw out of him in the spring game in terms of covering guys out of the backfield or tight end, being involved in pass coverage, to stuffing the run, to attacking the quarterback on pass rush. Yep. I think both those 2 guys are going to be answers to who's that dynamic edge rusher that Oregon has this season. And I think it'll fall on those 2 names. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll finish up this podcast with a look at the schedule. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. Some scheduling news came out, and real quick, we'll get you up to date on that before we dive into ranking the easiest games and whatnot. But Oregon's game against Idaho is set for a 4:30 kickoff on the Big Ten Network. The Boise State game will be broadcast on Peacock, so you'll have to have that streaming. I think the schedule is out on that one too, right? 7 or 5?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know. We can pull it up. It's on Go Ducks.
It's actually not on Go Ducks. That's why I was like confused. Fox has the game against Oregon State the following week for a 12:30 game. And then we also know a couple games were moved to Friday nights with some kickoff times. The home Big Ten opener against Michigan State has been moved to October 4th, and that'll be a 6 o'clock game. And then the Purdue game on the road on October 18th has moved to Friday for a 5 p.m. game as well. And then a contest against Illinois at home on October 26th has been slotted for either a 12:30, 1 p.m. or 4:30 p.m. game. No TV time yet, or no TV selection yet. So we've got some TV times. We got some stuff there. Jared wrote a story on on DuckTerritory about it. But let's dive into now ranking these games from easiest to toughest. And it's strange to feel this way, but obviously Idaho is going to be the easiest one. I don't think we need to dive into too much of this one. But the next one doesn't feel right seeing this name, but it also makes 100% sense, and that's Oregon State at 11.
Yeah, it felt kind of gross putting a rivalry game there, but it's just it's brutal, man.
Yes.
Like I don't know what their team's going to look like really in any sport right now. I mean, it's just
they lost their entire softball roster to the portal this week,
and they lost their whole women's basketball team, which was like a national championship kind of adjacent contending team basically to the portal. So football's no different. They're decimated. They lost essentially all of their good young players, all of their good starting players. I mean, it's Trent Bray has his work cut out for him. Again, I felt weird putting it at 11. I just kind of, the more I looked at it and thought, I think the teams they play in the Big Ten are better. I think Boise State's definitely better. It felt like the right place to put them. So yeah, sadly the Beavers down at 11. I don't know what the future holds for them. It's a tough time to be living up in Corvallis as an OSU fan, I'm sure.
Yeah, I have no arguments with OSU being so low on this list. The next one is a name that I think college football fans, if you're just a fan in general, are familiar with. Brett Bielema of Illinois, coming to town October 26th. This is a matchup that, frankly, these two teams haven't played a ton, and I like to think Illinois is not very good, but at the same time, there's just so much newness here. I don't know. I don't know how to compare them from a past Pac-12 team. Like, it's a team that Oregon should beat, but are they a team that they should blow out, or is this one that gives you challenges when they shouldn't?
It feels like kind of like a Cal team where Oregon has this overmatches them in terms of talent and physicality and stuff. And obviously Cal has the advantage of Wilcox just having some familiarity with Oregon, having played here and kind of grown up in the area. And certainly they played Oregon tough for a while, but you just look at the kind of last couple of years. I don't think this game will be very competitive. Illinois was pretty good in 2022. I think they won 7 or 8 games. This last year they won 5, and I don't think the roster got a lot better. So I think this is the easiest Big Ten game. You could convince me a couple of other ones I have coming up are easier, but I don't think this is one that the Ducks should be sweating much.
Next on the list is this is a tough one. This is the team I compare a lot to Cal, where it's Maryland. They play Oregon November 9th. First time these teams will ever have met. Excuse me. Mike Locksley, the head coach, has in the last 3 years has won 23 games. They're just good enough to get to a bowl game, but they're not good enough to get to an elite bowl game. But it's a program that they've had some absolutely terrible years. They've had some solid years, but they've never really had that special season. The last time they won 10 games was when they did it 3 years in a row from 2001 to 2003 under Ralph Friedgen. The head coach. They went to the Orange Bowl, they went to the Peach Bowl, and then they went to the Gator Bowl, and they finished in the top 20 of the AP poll all 3 of those years. They've never finished in the top 20 in the AP poll since then, and they've only finished once in the top 25 post, at the end of the season. That was in 2010. It's a weird program. Like, they've had bowl games. They've won bowl games. They've won 3 bowl games in a row going into this year, but none of them are special seasons. So I don't know this is a tough team to gauge.
And for me, the thing is Tua Tagovailoa's brother Talia had been there for the last 3 years for that run and had played pretty darn well. He won't be back. Yep. So I don't know. I mean, I think Loxley's a good offensive I do kind of like your Cal comparison, just kind of inverted coaching, I guess, specialties, where Loxley's, I think, a really good offensive coach. I mean, he was offensive coordinator at Alabama for a bit when they were obviously very successful. And as you said, has had some real success of late, but I'll be curious to see what they are without without a quarterback that they can kind of rely on. So I might have them way too low. Again, this is a hard exercise to do in May, and especially when you're entering a new conference and you're just kind of trying to get a feel for everything. But I looked at Illinois and Maryland as kind of on a tier together as the two easiest Big Ten games, just because they're both at home, and I don't think either team will be very good.
Next on the list is a road date on a Friday night in West Lafayette. It's Purdue, October 18th. This game got a lot harder when it got pushed to Friday after Ohio State.
Yeah, maybe. I should have probably. This is one other one where you could convince me they should be like 5th or 6th on this if you really wanted to. They won 4 games last year.
Yeah.
Ryan Walters is just kind of getting things started there. I think the Purdue's going to be a good program in a couple of years. I just don't know if they're there right now. The fact that it's on the road and like you said, it does have kind of trap game. Like it feels like a trap game, Washington State after like a USC week kind of thing in the Pac-12, right? Like that's what I would compare it to. Like, Oregon's probably more talented. They're probably a team that they should beat pretty handily, but they're going on the road. It's a short week this time, and Purdue's kind of can be a little feisty. So we'll see. I think Oregon, I think a lot of these Big Ten games, until you get to like the top 3 or 4 on this list, are games I expect Oregon should win pretty comfortably. Maybe Purdue's more trappy with the fact that it is on a short week on the road after Ohio State. Maybe it should be a little higher up the list, but this is where I slated them, so I'll stand by it, I guess.
I mean, I don't have an issue with them at 8 because just look at their history the last.
Yeah, they've been terrible.
Yeah, 11 years ago they won 1 game in a season. Now I understand like there's been 3 other coaches since then at Purdue. And none of those players on that team are on this year's team. But that's the state of this program is just 11 years ago, they won 1 game. 4 years ago during the COVID season, they won just 2 games. And then most recently they lost 8 games. So like they again, much like Maryland, much like Illinois, they don't have years in which they get to the pinnacle and they win double-digit games. I mean, just looking at their history, the last time they won 10 games in a season was 1993. Excuse me.
Jeez.
Wow, I'm off on that one.
I think didn't they do well with Drew Brees that one year? The one
no, 1979.
No? Okay.
Last time. Yeah, it's been a long time there. Drew Brees was what? Late 90s?
I think that was 99 maybe.
99 they went 7-5. They made the Rose Bowl in 2000 with Drew Brees.
That's the year, yeah.
And they went 8-4.
Okay.
I mean they went 6-2 in conference play, but this isn't a program that's had a rich history of success, and I think it's perfectly fine to be at 8. Number 7 on this list, I think could be drastically higher in 2 years based upon simply a coaching change who the head coach now wants to actually recruit high school players, and that's UCLA and led by former Bruin and now head coach Deshaun Foster.
But in the interim, I dropped him actually. I did this exercise once like in January, right after they released the schedule, and I think I had them at 5 maybe.
Yeah.
Not having Chip Kelly.
Oh, that matters.
It matters in the short term. You know what I mean? Like Deshaun Foster's never been a head coach. The team lost a lot of talent from that defense last year was awesome. It's kind of a bummer. The offense was not better. Like if you would have had some of the offensive players from the previous year on that last team for UCLA, they would have been a really good team. I think this is going to be kind of a bad UCLA team, and it could be a down year. And the only reason I have it up here is just because it's on the road, and frankly, because there aren't a lot of really tough games in this conference slate. The more you look through it, I mean, you'll see when I get to the top number. I mean, numbers 4 and 5 are against teams that you could convince me are like barely bowl eligible, but that's sort of the way the schedule kind of plays out this year.
100%. All right, next on the list, maybe a surprise by me, but then you start thinking about it, and it makes a little bit more sense. And that's Boise State at number 6, a team that Oregon will host on September 7th. And I found the date or the time. It is a 7 p.m. kickoff on Peacock. Even though they don't have it on Go Ducks, their football account did tweet out the official listing of 7 p.m.
Look, Boise State is a team that won the Mountain West last year and still fired their coach.
Yeah.
I know they fired him mid-season and then they rallied and pulled it out. But this is a proud program that, Oregon's never beat Boise State, by the way. I think that clearly changes this year. I think Oregon's going to be a lot better. But I respect the brand and the fact that I don't know, like how it's kind of interesting to look at this. Like, is Malachi Nelson like the second or third best quarterback Oregon's going to face this season? Like, I don't know how good he is because he hasn't really played, but this is a former top 10, top 12 prospect in the country maybe a couple of years ago as a quarterback. Started at USC and then transferred to the Broncos recently. They don't play a ton of big-time quarterback talents. They also bring back their star running back, whose name is escaping me, Ashton Janty.
Yes.
I think this is a tougher game than maybe people want to give it credit for. But, this list, again, like I said, I think it's top-heavy. You've got, I think, 3 games that are going to be really difficult. And the rest of it, I look and kind of go, like, I kind of feel like Oregon should win most of these games comfortably. I know that's not how football seasons play out. There's always a game or two where you go, oh, shoot, that game we had marked down as a 3-score game, and it ended up being a 1-score game. But there's not a ton on this list that really scares you. And so I think Boise State at 6, kind of right in the middle, actually kind of makes a lot of sense.
I think so too. It's one that, like, Oregon should be challenged, but Oregon should win this game probably by more than 7, 9, 10 points.
I think they're going to be like 3 or 4 score favorites, and I wouldn't be surprised if they honestly if they cover that. Yeah.
Number 5 on the list, the Big Ten home opener for the Oregon Ducks, a return to a familiar name from a head coach. That's Michigan State, and new first-year head coach, former Beaver head coach Jonathan Smith, will be coming back to Eugene. He's certainly familiar with Oregon, knows the ins and outs of this program, but it's a program I kind of, I don't know, look at in the same light as Oregon State. Like, they're not the big school in their state. They've had more success than Oregon State has had, but nonetheless, like, it's one in which, I don't know, they should challenge you, but Oregon should also get this win. And it probably, like what you said with Boise, probably going to be a 2-score, 3-score spread.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a weird one. I mean, Michigan State last year was terrible, but, like, could you have scripted a more strange start to a year where your coach gets fired in, like, kind of a really embarrassing, kind of sad kind of way? I don't know how it sits in East Lansing, but, like, that whole Mel Tucker thing, like, that was such a distraction the whole year, and they just, like, totally folded. This is a team that was playing in the college football playoff or was in contention at least a couple of years ago. They're not the case at all. I think Jonathan Smith will do a good job. I'm not convinced this year they're going to be fantastic. I think they'll probably, like I said earlier, maybe they'll be 6 or 7 win team. We'll see how ready Aiden Childs is, the guy they brought over from Oregon State, who everybody was really excited about as a prep prospect. But I don't see the Spartans being like an awesome team this year, and yet I have them like as the fifth hardest game on the schedule. So go figure.
Next on the list, a bit surprising here, but maybe we shouldn't, because they are 3-0 in the last 3 games against the Oregon Ducks. That's the Washington Huskies. But the players that won those games, the head coach that coached those games, are all gone. This is entirely basically new Washington Husky team, yet you still got them at number 4.
Really, I didn't know where to put them.
Yeah, it's hard.
Like, I mean, should they be below Boise State? Some people tell me they should be like 8 or 9 on this list. I don't know. I mean, there's still the rivalry factor here. There's still the fact this is the last game of the season. Now, this is going to be Oregon's conference rivalry again. This is replacing Oregon State in terms of final game of the regular season, I think, basically every year now in the Big Ten. And their team is not going to be anywhere near as good as it was last year. I mean, the fact that they had so many players drafted in the NFL draft sort of spoke to the difficulties they presented. And shoot, Oregon was 3 points from beating them both times. But I don't know. They could be a lot lower. This team also just played for a national championship game, and it felt weird to have them below like Michigan State, who won 4 games last year when both of them underwent coaching changes. and both games are at home. So I don't know. I went with them at 4. There's the rivalry factor. Maybe Washington plays a little bit better. Maybe the season ends up being better than expected, but I know there's a lot of Oregon fans who think the Huskies are kind of fading, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, they're certainly not going to be anywhere near as good as they were last year. It remains to be seen to me if this is like a 6 or an 8 win team, or if this is a team that's even below that.
Yeah, see, I completely agree with you in terms of I think they're going to be terrible in 2024, and they're going to win. They're going to win games. They might be close to getting to bowl eligibility. They might just get past bowl eligibility because I think they play a weak enough non-conference schedule, and there's enough bad teams in the Big Ten to squeak to 6 or 7 wins. But when you compare them to the Oregons, the Ohio States, the Michigans in the Big Ten, I think they're gonna be a step or 2 below those 3 programs. But the flip side is Oregon hasn't beaten Washington under Dan Lanning, and nope. I know they've all been close games. They've all been things that this happens and Oregon wins, or this doesn't happen and Oregon wins. But the reality is they didn't, or they did happen, and Oregon lost. And so you have to throw in the fact that they haven't beaten them yet. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a game in which demons are exercised and Oregon wins by a really large margin. But I also would preface this by saying like this isn't the same Washington team as the last 2 seasons. But until Oregon beats them, I think you have to have this kind of right around this area, especially because it's the last game of the year too.
Yeah, and again, if you're picking between Michigan State, Boise State, UCLA,
it's Washington.
It's got to be. It's hard to sell me that they should be much lower than this. Like maybe you could convince me Michigan State had a better offseason and has. I think Jonathan Smith's a better coach than Jed Fish. I'll go on record in saying that, but I kind of think based upon the school's rivalry and everything, I just still have Washington at 4.
Yeah. All right, next on the list, this is a game that I hope we all get to go to from a media standpoint because I'm excited to see jump around, and that's the trip to Michigan, November 16th, a mid-November game in the Midwest, upper Midwest. To my knowledge, it could be 30 degrees and snowy, or it could be a nice, cool, crisp 56 degrees Saturday afternoon game in Madison. It's going to be interesting. This is what I'm excited for.
Yeah. Wisconsin at 3. I think you said Michigan. Well,
Wisconsin. Sorry.
This is one of, to me, 3 games that are very, is it a word, losable, but like games that like genuinely I look at and go, this is going to be a tough one, and the Badgers are, I think, kind of figuring it out under Luke Fickell. Last year's season obviously wasn't what they wanted. They only won 7 games. But Oregon knows from battling with the Badgers over the history, they've had some incredible Rose Bowl games against each other. Seems like whenever these 2 teams meet, it's really competitive and kind of comes down to some incredible late game heroics. The Ducks have gotten the better of the Badgers in the most 2 recent big games there. But I think this game being played in Madison, like you said, it could be 15 degrees, snow on the ground. Like who knows? And could the elements play enough of a factor where this one becomes a lot lower scoring? Because again, I do think like Oregon to me is the better team. And we just saw Washington State go into Madison. I think it was last year or the year before that and win a game there, and I think Oregon's a lot more talented team, but this is conference play. This is, mid-November, end of the season, teams are peaking, or maybe there are injuries involved, knock on all the wood you can. But I just think this is a tough game, and Oregon will be favored. Oregon should be favored. But I also think, like, I just wouldn't sleep on this one being one where you go, it's kind of sneaky. It's right at the end there, and playing those elements on the road at a really tough environment with maybe a lot on the line potentially, depending on how the regular season goes. I think this is pretty clearly was my number 3, although you could convince me 2 and 3 could be swapped here.
And then that leads us right into number 2, and that's a road date at the Big House, November 2nd, the Michigan Wolverines, defending champions. But it's going to be a different look of the Michigan Wolverines. New head coach, Sherrone Moore, is leading the program now after Jim Harbaugh, more connections to Oregon, leaves to the NFL to go coach former Oregon Duck quarterback Justin Herbert and the Chargers.
I mean, Washington and Michigan are these teams played for a national championship a couple months ago, but I really don't know what either are going to be this year. I think Michigan's going to be better than Washington, just to be clear. I don't hope that doesn't get confused because they have a ton of talent returning, or at least good players returning. And Sharon Moore has kind of kept that continuity afloat, and obviously was their head coach for almost as many games as Jim Harbaugh last year because of suspension. So I think Michigan at 2, based on the environment, based upon the pedigree of that team, based on the fact this is the team that's been kind of, I don't want to say dominated, but has won the Big Ten the last several seasons. They should be at 2. We'll see how the season plays out. They might be a shell of themselves, or maybe we'll be surprised and Sharon Moore will guide them. And, we don't know who their quarterback is going to be just yet. I don't think. Maybe whoever kind of wins that job ends up being a lot better than some people expect. But I think this is a really tough game, and a game that's definitely will be a challenge for Oregon to win. I think if Oregon plays its best this year, based upon the way these rosters are shaping, Oregon should be able to win, but it's not going to be easy.
And then the last one on the date, and this is the most obvious one, just as much as Idaho's being the easiest, and it's probably the game of the year. Oregon gets to host Ohio State October 12th in Eugene. The Ducks have won one meeting, but it's the most recent meeting between these two programs.
And they don't really play in Eugene either. If you look at
they don't come west.
So now they're going to have to. And we'll like this. You said biggest game of the season potentially, like maybe the most important game ever played at Autzen, like possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see. This could be like 2 versus 3 or 1 versus 3 or something. I mean, these teams they're in the conversation early as the 2 of the top 4 teams in the country in the preseason kind of off-season rankings, at least. I think this game's going to be awesome. There's going to be so much NFL talent. That's another thing. Like, will there have ever been as much NFL talent on the field at Autzen before? Maybe not. It's going to be it's just going to be very different than what we've seen, I think, in the past. Like, Oregon plays blue bloods here within this own conference, whether you want to say USC and Washington still are, but Ohio State's a different kind of brand, and them coming out here, like, I know ticket prices are through the roof. I know people are. My dad's been struggling to try to figure out a way to get a ticket. Like, this is going to be a different thing.
$1,000 to get a ticket.
Yeah, I was going to say he was looking at prices, and they were debating whether or not it was going to be worthwhile. I think he and his buddy are going to still try to find a way to go, but the numbers are crazy, and that Columbus is going to send all of its Buckeye fans out west, and you also know that they're going to be really motivated in part because of what happened the last time these two teams played, and because theoretically the winner of this team is probably the lead, the front runner to win the conference and to solidify a college football playoff berth. So I'm fired up. This one's going to be fun. It
hasn't been this way in the league or for Oregon in a long time because the Pac-12 has just been what it has been. But now in the Big Ten, it sets up this matchup where honestly, Eric, I think you could argue, I don't know if it's definitive, but you could make an argument that this is the biggest game in college football and for this season. And I can't think of another game of that magnitude reaching that level. I mean, I would, my first thought was, okay, well, Washington, Oregon last season, the first meeting in the regular year, but I wouldn't, there were other games that were equally as big. Maybe Oregon LSU to open the season in 2011.
It's a good one.
That was a big one.
There were some Oregon Stanford games in that kind of same era where it was like 2 versus 5, but
right.
I don't know.
USC Oregon, I think when they came up to beat Oregon in 2010 or 9, I can't remember what year that was. I can't remember, but there really hasn't been a lot of these opportunities where this game not only shapes the narrative for the Big Ten race for each team, but also shapes the narrative for the country. Like what happens with this game. And that hasn't happened all that often, if ever, for Oregon.
Now it's I think going to be a real opportunity to have Autzen be on display and mean a lot here. And for, Oregon has a reputation as being one of the louder stadiums in the country. They're going to need it to be in a game like this, just like Ann Arbor needs to be that when Oregon comes out there in November. So, I mean, it gets me excited just thinking about what that's going to be like, thinking about all the attention that's going to be brought, all the, I mean, Dan Lanning doesn't love doing press engagements. He's going to be a busy guy that week. I guarantee they're going to be doing a ton of media stuff nationally. And obviously I'm sure he'll care even less about what we ask him that week. But yeah, no, I mean, this was really easy to pick them first. I don't think there was really any debate. I mean, once I think I did this exercise again, right around the national championship, like right after it. And I had Michigan one out of respect for Michigan. But once Jim Harbaugh left a couple weeks later, and once you kind of saw that McCarthy was leaving and a couple of the other Michigan players were leaving, and you saw what Ohio State has done subsequently through the portal and all the guys they're retaining, this is a clash of the Titans game, and I think a really easy choice for number one.
Yep. All right, that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back Monday with some focus on recruiting and more here for the Oregon Ducks and the Odds and Audibles podcast. But until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.